All right, welcome back to The Explainer. So today we're tackling a really big one. We're going to dive into the life of a man who was, well, a walking contradiction. On one hand, people called him an enlightened master. On the other, a dangerous cult leader. I mean, think about it. A spiritual guru who owned 93 Rolls Royces. Yeah, this is the story of Osho. And our goal today is to really try and understand this rebel mystic who quite literally challenged everything.
So, Osho's whole philosophy, it basically starts by flipping everything you thought you knew about spirituality right on its head. He kicks things off with this really simple but, wow, really profound question about what enlightenment even is.
And he doesn't stop there. He takes that idea and just pushes it further, challenging this super old school view that spirituality has to be, all serious and separate from your real life. For Osho, the whole point wasn't to escape life. No way. It was to dive headfirst into it, and to do it with this incredible sense of celebration. And this right here is the central paradox that really defines the guy. So, in this explainer, we're going to explore the man who pretty much took on religion, politics, morality, you name it. But here's the real kicker, and this is what's most important. We're going to look at how his core ideas, even the really controversial stuff, could actually radically transform how you see your own life.
Okay, so to really get a handle on his teachings, you first have to understand his life. Because trust me, it was just as unconventional as his ideas. I mean, we're talking about a journey from being a rebellious kid in a small Indian village to becoming a full-blown global phenomenon. And that journey, that's the key to unlocking his whole message.
So just look at this timeline. It shows this incredibly rapid, constant evolution. Right from his earliest days, the guy questioned everything. He wasn't interested in just taking someone's word for it. Nope, he was driven by this deep need for direct, personal experience, not just borrowed beliefs. And you can see that progression, right? From the quiet halls of academia to the massive world stage, a journey that just kept getting faster and faster.
But, and this is a big but, his journey was anything but peaceful. This is where the story takes a really dramatic turn. In the 1980s, he founded this commune out in Oregon called Rajneeshpuram. And wow, it became the absolute epicenter of intense conflict with local authorities, federal government, the media, you name it. And all of this leads to a critical question that people are still arguing about today.
So what was he? A mystic? A genius? A cult leader? Or just a completely misunderstood visionary? The truth is, it really depends on who you ask. And to even begin to find an answer, we have to look past all those crazy headlines and dive straight into his actual ideas. Because believe it or not, at the very heart of all that controversy, there was one radical, yet surprisingly simple, core idea that kind of explains everything.
Okay, so for Osho, the answer to, well, pretty much everything wasn't about belief or morality or religion, none of that. It was consciousness, just awareness. He argued that real, true transformation doesn't come from following a bunch of rules. It comes from becoming intensely, totally aware. Now, this phrase right here is absolutely fascinating. Be a light unto yourself. It actually echoes the last words of the Buddha, but what Osho did was modernize it for our time. See, he wasn't trying to get people to follow him blindly. Quite the opposite. He was practically demanding that they fire their gurus, and yes, that included him, and find their own inner authority. And this, right here, illustrates that core message perfectly. On the left, you've got everything he wanted to tear down. Things like organized religion, blind obedience, repression, all that guilt-based morality. And then on the right, you see what he offered instead. Things like individual freedom, meditation, celebration, and just authentic living. A total shift in focus. So, this intense focus on the individual, well, it led him to completely reinvent one of the most ancient tools in the spiritual toolbox, meditation. He looked at the traditional methods and saw a huge problem, especially when you try to apply them to, us, modern people.
His big observation was this: modern humans we're too restless. We're too full of chaos to just sit silently. He believed that our stressed out, anxious modern minds just can't find stillness by forcing it,
our internal chaos is just way too big for that. So instead of trying to fight it, he designed this totally radical alternative that was meant to work with all that chaos. And this is it, his famous dynamic meditation. It's a 5-stage process. And here's the brilliant insight behind it. You have to first get all that pent-up chaos and emotional energy out before you can even hope to experience real stillness. You can see it in the steps here. You've got to go through the storm, the chaotic breathing, the catharsis, before you can finally find that quiet center. So the crucial point here is this incredible integration of chaos and silence, of the worldly and the spiritual. And he managed to capture this idea perfectly in what is probably his most famous and most powerful metaphor. He called this ideal Zorba the Buddha. This was his vision, really, for a new kind of human, a whole person. Someone who doesn't have to choose between the material world and the spiritual one, but who can live fully and consciously in both at the same time.
Think of it like this. On one hand, you've got Zorba. That's the earthly, sensual, life-loving part of us that, eats and drinks and dances. And then on the other hand, you have the Buddha. That's the silent, aware, witnessing consciousness. For centuries, spirituality has basically said you have to reject Zorba to find the Buddha. But Osho's teaching, it was totally radical. He said the Buddha is actually incomplete without all that juice for life that Zorba brings.
And you know what? This Zorba the Buddha idea, it really helps explain all the controversies that surrounded him. That whole fleet of Rolls Royces, the fact that he spoke so openly about sex, these weren't just random crazy things. They were deliberate expressions of this philosophy. And as you might guess, you can look at them from two very, very different angles.
Okay, so from one side, his critics saw him as just materialistic, manipulative, and indulgent. Plain and simple. But from the other side, his supporters saw him deliberately shattering that old image of the poor, holy man who denies the world. They saw him exposing society's hypocrisy about wealth and pleasure. And this duality, this is what makes him so impossible to pin down, which, might have been exactly what he wanted.
So, with all this complexity, how on earth are we supposed to make sense of the guy? Well, the consensus seems to be that it's not about finding one single, easy answer. It's about being able to hold multiple, even contradictory perspectives all at the same time. So, let's break down 4 key ways to look at him.
So, was he a spiritual master updating ancient wisdom for the modern world? Or maybe a radical therapist who was helping people dissolve their egos? How about a sociological threat to authority systems? Or was he a charismatic but flawed leader whose movement just got too big for him to handle? See, the key isn't to pick one. The real insight here is that he was probably all of these things at once. And to really understand Osho, you have to have the maturity to hold that kind of paradox in your mind.
All right, so let's bring all of this home. What does this actually mean for you? For me, this is the most important part of our whole explainer today. How can you take these complex, sometimes really controversial ideas and actually apply them to your own life? Really, it boils down to a few practical things. It's about practicing awareness every day, just watching your thoughts without judging them. It's about releasing emotional suppression, actually expressing your feelings instead of bottling them up. It's about dropping all that guilt-based morality and replacing it with a real sense of personal responsibility. And maybe the most crucial point of all, question everything. And yes, that includes Osho himself. Never accept anything as truth unless you've experienced it for yourself.
And that really brings us to his ultimate teaching, which is summed up perfectly right here. At the end of the day, Osho wasn't trying to create a bunch of followers who would just repeat what he said. He was a provocateur. His goal was to destroy our dependence on outside answers and to push every single one of us to find our own directly experienced truth.
Because in the end, it doesn't really matter whether you see him as a saint or a charlatan. His central challenge, that remains just as powerful today as it ever was. What he did was hold up a mirror. And the real question he leaves us with, well, it isn't about him at all. It's about us. Are we awake? Are we celebrating this incredible life? And are we brave enough to find our own truth?